The sun was beginning to set over the quiet countryside, casting golden light over the trees that lined the edge of the forest. The Williams family lived in a cozy house just beyond the tree line. A place where nature and home blended seamlessly. Life was peaceful here, and the family enjoyed taking walks through the woods, listening to the birds and feeling the fresh forest air. On one particular evening, as they strolled along their usual path, something unusual caught their attention. Near the base of a large oak tree, curled up in the fallen leaves, was a small bear cub. It was shivering, its tiny body rising and falling with quick, frightened breaths. The little creature looked exhausted, its fur matted with dirt, its eyes wide with fear. Ben, the youngest in the family, gasped, "Mom, Dad, look, it's a baby bear." His parents, Emily and Tom, exchanged a worried glance. It wasn't common to find a bear cub alone. Where was its mother? Emily knelt beside the cub, watching it carefully. It didn't try to run. Instead, it whimpered softly, too weak to move. "It looks like it's been out here for a while," Tom said, noticing how frail the cub seemed. "It must have gotten separated from its mother." Ben's eyes filled with concern. "We can't leave it here. It's scared and hungry." Emily hesitated. It was dangerous to interfere with wild animals, especially bears. But this cub was helpless. If they left it alone, it wouldn't survive the night. "We should take it home," she finally said, "just until we figure out what to do." Tom nodded, knowing they couldn't turn their backs on the helpless creature. Gently, he picked up the cub, cradling it in his arms. The little bear barely struggled, too tired to resist. Ben watched in amazement as his father carried the cub toward home. Once they arrived, they wrapped the bear in a warm blanket and set up a small bed in the corner of the living room. Emily quickly prepared a bottle of warm milk, hoping it would help, while Ben sat beside the cub, watching it with fascination. "Let's name him Rocky," Ben said excitedly. "He looks like a Rocky." Tom chuckled. "Rocky? Huh, I suppose that fits." Rocky hesitated at first but eventually took slow, careful sips from the bottle. His tiny paws gripped Ben's hand, as if searching for comfort. Ben beamed, feeling a deep connection forming between them. Over the next few days, the family did their best to care for Rocky. They fed him warm milk, gave him a soft place to sleep, and kept him safe. At first, he was nervous and stayed curled up in his little bed. But as he regained strength, he began to explore his new surroundings. Ben spent hours sitting with him, talking to him as if he were a friend. Rocky, in return, seemed to trust Ben the most. Whenever Ben walked into the room, Rocky would perk up, his dark eyes following his every move. He would nuzzle against Ben's arm, making small sounds of contentment. It wasn't long before the two became inseparable. Rocky's playful nature soon emerged. He would chase after Ben's shoelaces, paw at his toys, and even try to climb onto the couch. Though his tiny legs often failed him, Ben would laugh, helping Rocky up and holding him close. "He thinks he's one of us," Emily remarked one afternoon, watching as Rocky followed Ben around the house. Tom nodded. "It's incredible how much trust he has in us." Though Rocky was happy, the family knew he couldn't stay with them forever. He was a wild animal, and he belonged in the forest. As much as they loved having him around, they began discussing what to do next. Ben hated the idea of letting Rocky go. "But he's just a baby," What if he gets lost again? Emily placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. We'll make sure he's ready. Sweetheart, we'll find a safe way for him to return to where he belongs. In the meantime, they continued to care for him, preparing him for the day he would return to the wild. Tom built a small enclosure in the backyard so Rocky could spend more time outside, learning to climb and explore safely. They introduced him to natural foods, berries, nuts, and fish, so he wouldn't rely on human care. Rocky grew stronger with each passing week. His playful nature remained, but there was something new in his eyes, a sense of curiosity about the world beyond the backyard fence. He would sometimes stare toward the forest, his ears twitching as if listening for something familiar. The time was coming, and they all knew it. One morning, after a long discussion, the family decided to take Rocky to a wildlife rehabilitation center nearby. The center specialized in helping orphaned or injured animals return to their natural habitat. It was the best chance for Rocky to live as he was meant to. The day they had to say goodbye was difficult. Ben sat beside Rocky, gently stroking his fur. "I'm going to miss you," he whispered. Rocky let out a soft noise, pressing his small nose against Ben's hand. The drive to the rehabilitation center was quiet. Ben watched as Rocky sat beside him in a carrier, looking out at the trees passing by. When they arrived, the staff greeted them warmly, assuring them that Rocky would be cared for and trained to survive in the wild. "He's going to be okay," one of the workers told Ben. "You gave him a chance to live. He'll grow up strong, just like he should." Ben nodded, though his heart ached. He watched as Rocky was taken into the facility, his small body disappearing through the doors. The drive home felt emptier without Rocky's tiny presence in the car. The house felt quieter, too. Ben missed the little bear's playful antics, the way he had followed him around like a shadow. But as the days passed, Ben found comfort in knowing they had done the right thing. Rocky was where he belonged. And one day, he would roam the forest, strong and free. Months later, the family received an update. Rocky had grown well under the care of the rehabilitation center. He had gained weight, learned essential survival skills, and was now ready to be released back into the wild. The Williams family was invited to watch his release. Standing at the edge of the forest, they saw Rocky emerge from his enclosure, now much larger and stronger. For a brief moment, he turned, as if recognizing the family one last time. Ben smiled, his heart full of pride. "Goodbye, Rocky," he whispered. With that, Rocky turned and disappeared into the trees, beginning the next chapter of his life in the wilderness, where he truly belonged. Rocky's recovery was slow at first, but under the tender care of the Williams family, he grew stronger each day. His once frail body filled out with muscle. His fur became shinier, and his playful energy returned. At first, he was hesitant, still unsure of his surroundings. But with each passing day, he became more comfortable, moving with confidence around the house and yard. Ben, the youngest in the family, had formed an unbreakable bond with Rocky. From the moment they had brought him home, Ben had taken it upon himself to be Rocky's best friend. He would sit with the bear cub for hours, telling him stories, gently petting his fur, and making sure he always felt safe. Rocky, in turn, followed Ben everywhere, whether Ben was doing homework, helping in the garden, or playing with his toys. Rocky was never far behind. As Rocky regained his strength, His playful nature blossomed. He would chase butterflies around the backyard, roll in the grass, and splash happily in a small kiddie pool the family had set up for him. Ben delighted in watching his furry friend explore the world with such curiosity. The two spent their days playing together, running through the yard, and even napping in the shade of the big oak tree near the house. Rocky, despite being a wild animal, seemed to trust the Williams family completely. He no longer cowered in fear, no longer whimpered in distress. Instead, he let out small, content huffs whenever Ben scratched behind his ears, and he would nuzzle up to Emily and Tom whenever they came outside to check on him. The once-lost cub had found a home, and for a while, it seemed like he belonged there. But as Rocky grew, the family began to notice changes. His playful nips became stronger, his small paws grew larger, and his once clumsy movements became more powerful. He started climbing trees, sharpening his claws on the wooden fence, and occasionally standing on his hind legs to sniff the air, as if sensing something beyond the home he had come to know. One afternoon, as Ben was playing fetch with Rocky, a game they had invented where Ben would toss a ball and Rocky would excitedly chase after it, something happened that made the family realize Rocky was changing. Ben threw the ball, and instead of running after it like usual, Rocky froze. His ears perked up, his nose twitched, and his body tensed. Then, without warning, he turned and bolted toward the fence. "Rocky, where are you going?" Ben called out, running after him. Rocky had caught the scent of something, perhaps another animal in the woods. His instincts were beginning to awaken, instincts that no amount of human care could suppress. He reached the fence and, to everyone's shock, reared up on his hind legs, placing his large paws on the wooden planks. Tom rushed outside, his face filled with concern. "He's getting too big," he said, watching as Rocky sniffed the air beyond the yard. "He's starting to feel the call of the wild." Emily nodded, her expression bittersweet. "We knew this day would come." Ben, overhearing their conversation, felt a pang of sadness. He knew Rocky wasn't a regular pet, but the idea of losing him felt unbearable. He had grown so used to having his best friend by his side. Over the next few weeks, Rocky's behavior became more independent. He spent more time staring beyond the yard, climbing trees, and testing his strength. He still played with Ben, but there was a new distance in his eyes, as if part of him was somewhere else. One evening, as the family sat outside watching the sunset, Ben turned to his parents. "He wants to leave, doesn't he?" His voice was quiet, filled with reluctant understanding. Emily put a comforting hand on his shoulder. "It's not that he wants to leave, sweetheart. It's that he needs to. He's growing up, and his instincts are telling him it's time to return to where he belongs." Ben swallowed hard, looking over at Rocky, who was rolling on the grass, unaware of the conversation happening about his future. "But he's my best friend." Tom sighed. "I know, son, but real love means doing what's best for someone, even when it's hard." Ben wiped his eyes and nodded. Deep down, he had always known this moment would come. He just hadn't realized how much it would hurt. That night, Ben sat beside Rocky in the yard, stroking his fur. "You're gonna go back to the forest soon, huh?" he whispered. Rocky let out a soft snuffle, resting his head in Ben's lap. Ben stayed up with him for hours, watching the stars and thinking about all the adventures they had shared. He didn't know what life would be like without Rocky by his side. But he also knew that Rocky deserved to be free. The next day, the family reached out to a local wildlife rehabilitation center. The experts agreed that Rocky was strong enough to return to the wild. But he would need some time in a controlled environment before being fully released. It was the best way to ensure he could adapt and survive. When the day came to take Rocky to the center, Ben felt like his heart was breaking. He hugged his furry friend tightly, burying his face in Rocky's thick fur. "I'm gonna miss you," he murmured. Rocky let out a soft noise, pressing his nose against Ben's cheek, as if he understood. The ride to the rehabilitation center was quiet. When they arrived, Ben watched as Rocky was led into a large, enclosed area where he would learn to hunt, climb, and survive without human care. It was the first step toward his true home. The family visited Rocky a few times, watching as he grew even stronger, more confident, more wild. And then, one day, they got the news. They were releasing him back into the forest. Ben and his parents stood at the edge of the woods as Rocky took his first steps into the wilderness. He paused for a moment, glancing back at them, as if saying one last goodbye. Then, with one final huff, he turned and disappeared into the trees. Ben wiped a tear from his cheek but smiled. "He's home," he whispered. And though Rocky was no longer by his side, Ben knew their friendship would always be a part of him. Rocky had been a part of their family, and no matter how far he roamed, he would always be in their hearts. It was a warm afternoon, and Rocky was feeling more playful than ever. The young bear had always been full of energy, constantly exploring every corner of the house and yard. But lately, he had started climbing things more: trees, fences, and even the railing of the upstairs balcony. Ben had seen him do it before, balancing on the edge with surprising agility for a bear his size. "Rocky, get down from there," he would scold, worried that his furry friend would hurt himself. But Rocky, always eager to test his limits, would simply huff and continue his mischief. That afternoon, Ben was inside doing his homework when he heard a loud thud from outside. His heart skipped a beat. He knew that sound could only mean one thing: Rocky. He dropped his pencil and ran to the balcony door, his stomach twisting with worry. "Rocky," he called out, stepping onto the wooden planks. His eyes widened in horror as he looked over the railing. Rocky lay sprawled on the ground below, his body still. Ben's breath caught in his throat. "No, no, no, Rocky." He bolted down the stairs, skipping steps as he rushed to his fallen friend. When he reached the spot where Rocky had landed, he dropped to his knees beside him. Rocky's eyes were half open, and he let out a low groan, his body still except for the slow rise and fall of his chest. Ben's hands shook as he reached out, gently touching Rocky's fur. "Come on, buddy, wake up," he pleaded. "You're okay. You have to be okay." After a few agonizing seconds, Rocky shifted slightly, letting out a small grunt. Ben exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "You're alive," he whispered, relief washing over him. Carefully, he examined Rocky, running his hands over his body to check for injuries. His mother, Emily, had taught him how to be gentle when handling animals, and he used all his knowledge now. Rocky flinched slightly when Ben touched his left leg, but there were no visible signs of a broken bone. No blood, no deep cuts, just some bruises. Maybe. Ben knew he couldn't leave him lying there. summoning all his strength. He slid his arms under Rocky's body and tried to lift him. The bear cub was much heavier than when they had first found him. But Ben didn't care. He had to get Rocky inside. With great effort, he dragged his friend back toward the house, stopping every few feet to catch his breath. "You're getting way too big for this," he muttered under his breath. But he didn't stop. By the time he reached the living room, his parents had heard the commotion and rushed over. "Ben, what happened?" Emily gasped, kneeling beside him. "He fell," Ben panted, his arms still wrapped around Rocky. "Off the balcony. I think he's okay, but he's hurt." Tom, Ben's father, crouched beside them, examining Rocky closely. "He's lucky," he murmured. "A fall from that height could have been much worse." Emily placed a hand on Ben's shoulder. "You did the right thing bringing him inside. Let's keep him comfortable and watch him closely." They laid Rocky down on a soft blanket, giving him water and letting him rest. For the rest of the evening, Ben barely left his side. He stroked Rocky's fur gently, whispering reassurances. "You scared me. You know that," he said softly. "You're not invincible." Rocky let out a tired huff, as if he understood. But as Ben sat beside his friend, a troubling thought crept into his mind. Rocky was growing bigger, stronger, and more restless. This accident was just another reminder that he wasn't meant to be here. Not forever. That night, as Ben lay in bed, he stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. Keeping Rocky had been the best thing for him when he was small and vulnerable. But now, was he doing the right thing by keeping him here? Would there be more accidents? What if, next time, Rocky wasn't so lucky? The thought made his chest tighten. He didn't want to lose Rocky. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to start thinking about what was best for him. And deep down, Ben feared he already knew the answer. For days, deep in the dense forest, a mother bear searched tirelessly for her lost cub. She had retraced her steps, sniffed every trail, and crossed rivers and hills, never giving up hope. The scent of her cub had faded, but her instincts refused to let her stop. She knew he was out there, somewhere, waiting to be found. Then, one evening, as she ventured closer to the edge of the forest, something changed. The air carried a familiar scent, faint but unmistakable. It was him, her cub. Her heart pounded as she followed the scent trail, weaving through trees and crossing a small clearing that led toward the human settlement. She had always avoided places where humans lived, wary of their strange ways, their noises, and their presence. But now, none of that mattered. Her baby was here, and she would not leave without him. Meanwhile, in the Williams household, Rocky was recovering from his recent fall. Though he had healed quickly, something about him had changed. He spent more time staring toward the forest, his ears twitching at every sound. He had always been curious, but now, it seemed different, like something was calling to him. Ben had noticed it too. Rocky had grown stronger, bigger, and more independent. Though he still played with Ben, there were moments when he seemed distant, as if part of him no longer belonged here. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ben and his parents sat outside, watching Rocky roam the yard. It was then that they noticed something unusual. A shadowy figure stood just beyond the fence, hidden between the trees. At first, it was barely visible, a presence rather than a shape. But as their eyes adjusted, they saw her, massive, strong, and waiting. Ben's breath caught in his throat. Mom, Dad, look. Emily's face paled. It's a bear. Tom stood protectively in front of his family. But something in the way the bear stood, still, unmoving, watching, told him that this wasn't a random encounter. And then, Rocky noticed. The young cub lifted his head, sniffing the air. His body went rigid. Then, as if an ancient instinct awoke within him, he took a step forward. The mother bear let out a low, deep huff. Rocky responded immediately. His ears perked up, his body tensed, and for the first time since arriving at the Williams home, he looked as if he truly understood who he was. Ben felt a lump form in his throat. He knew what this meant. She's his mother, he whispered. Tom exhaled slowly. She found him. Rocky took another step toward the fence, letting out a small, hesitant noise. The mother bear waited, her massive frame unmoving. For a long moment, no one spoke. The air was thick with understanding. Emily swallowed hard. It's time, isn't it? Ben's eyes burned with unshed tears. But he nodded. He had known for weeks that this moment would come. Rocky wasn't meant to live in their world forever. He belonged in the wild, with his own kind. Tom took a deep breath. We should open the gate. Ben's heart pounded as he walked toward the latch, his hands shaking. He hesitated, looking down at Rocky one last time. You'll be okay out there, he said softly. She's been looking for you this whole time. Rocky turned his head, looking at Ben with dark, intelligent eyes. For a moment, it was as if he understood everything, the love, the care, the friendship. Then, as Ben unlatched the gate and stepped back, Rocky took his first steps toward the life he was meant to have. The mother bear let out another low, welcoming rumble. Rocky hesitated just once, glancing back at the family that had saved him. Ben wiped his eyes. Go on, buddy. And then, with one final huff, Rocky ran toward his mother. She lowered her head, sniffing him, nudging him with her nose as if making sure he was real. Then, wrapping her massive body protectively around him, she turned toward the forest. The two bears disappeared into the trees, their forms blending into the wild. Ben stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where Rocky had been. Emily placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. You gave him a second chance, Ben. Tom nodded. And he'll always be part of our story. Ben took a deep breath, smiling through his tears. Rocky was home. The night Rocky left was one Ben would never forget. As the young bear disappeared into the forest with his mother, an overwhelming mix of emotions filled Ben's heart. He was happy, knowing that Rocky had found his way back to where he truly belonged. But at the same time, an ache settled deep within him. For so long, Rocky had been part of their family. From the moment they had found him, weak, frightened, and alone, Ben had done everything he could to protect him. He had fed him, played with him, and spent countless hours talking to him as if he were a little brother. Watching him go now felt like saying goodbye to a best friend. Emily knelt beside Ben, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. You did something incredible, sweetheart. Without you, Rocky might not have survived. Tom nodded, his voice gentle. You gave him a second chance at life. And now, he's back where he's supposed to be. Ben wiped at his eyes, sniffling. He knew they were right. But it didn't make it any easier. He stared into the trees, hoping to catch one last glimpse of Rocky. The forest, now quiet, seemed to whisper its approval. as if it too understood that Rocky was finally home. The days that followed felt strange. The house felt emptier without the sound of Rocky's playful growls or the sight of him tumbling around in the yard. Ben still found himself glancing toward the door in the mornings, half expecting Rocky to come bounding in, demanding attention. But each time, reality reminded him that Rocky was gone. Yet, as time passed, the sadness began to fade, replaced by something else, gratitude. Ben realized how lucky he was to have shared those months with Rocky, to have been part of his journey. He carried those memories like treasures, each one a reminder of the bond they had formed. One evening, a few weeks after Rocky's departure, Ben and his parents took a walk in the forest. The air was crisp, filled with the earthy scent of pine and fallen leaves. Ben found himself looking around, wondering if Rocky was somewhere nearby, roaming free with his mother. Then, just as they reached a small clearing, something caught Ben's eye. Paw prints, fresh ones, larger than they had been before, alongside an even bigger set. Ben's heart skipped a beat. He knelt down, running his fingers over the indentations in the dirt. "He's been here," he whispered. Emily and Tom exchanged a knowing smile. "He's growing," Tom observed, "and he's still close by." Ben felt warmth spread through his chest. Rocky might have returned to the wild, but in a way, he wasn't truly gone. He was out there, living the life he was meant to. But the connection they had would always remain. As they walked back home, Ben felt lighter. He knew he would always miss Rocky. But more than that, he felt proud. Proud that they had helped him. Proud that he was strong enough to return to where he belonged. And most of all, proud that their story, his and Rocky's, was one of love, kindness, and a bond that would never truly be broken. From that day forward, whenever Ben looked out at the trees, he smiled, knowing that somewhere beyond them, Rocky was free.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.